Welcome, welcome. Today we're going to unpack a concept, and for me, it's been a secret. It's really not a secret, but it's kind of a really cool strategy that most people don't think about, and it's called dig your well before you're thirsty. So I have a feeling that there's a lot of thirsty people in the business world today. There's a lot of business owners and a lot of salespeople that are very thirsty. They wish they had something to drink. And what I mean by drink is I think they wish that they had more business coming in today, right? Because, if you don't have water, right, as a human being, if you go too long without water, you die, unfortunately. And in business, if you go too long without revenue, without sales, you die. It's just nature. That's how it is. That's the law of nature in business. And so digging your well before you're thirsty is a concept that I adopted from a book called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty by Harvey Mackay. I think it was published in the late 90s. I read it, I don't know, well over a decade ago. I'm not sure how, it's probably at least 15 years ago I read it. But it's a book called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty by Harvey Mackay. And he talks about, and I can't really unpack the entire book, but it goes hand in hand and very much in line with my philosophy of relationships over transactions. Now, I will tell you that in the brokerage business, one of the things that I've been most disappointed with, over the course of the time I've been in logistics since 2003. So I've been involved for 17 years now. Okay. One of the things I'm most disappointed with people in the logistics industry, particularly the brokerage sector, is they're very transactional. They're very focused on what load do you have? What quotes do you need? How much business can you give me today? And it's a huge mistake. Now, I understand that you have to ask for the sale. And I understand that there's times when you have to be a little bit more aggressive. But what I've found in the brokerage industry is that most people are very short-sighted. Now, the successful ones have learned that relationships are way more important than any individual transaction or any individual day or month, right? So this concept of focusing on developing relationships over transactions is the concept that we're going to talk about today. As you think about it as a freight broker or freight agent, there are really probably 4 or 5 different groups of people that you need to focus in on developing relationships with. The first one that obviously comes to mind is customers, right? Shippers. So prospects, people that you're not currently doing business with, you need to figure out a way to develop a relationship with them, to develop that know, like, and trust that is required for them to start doing business with you. So that's one of the people in the audience, but there's actually 3 or 4 more. A couple of other stakeholders are carriers. As a broker, it's important that you develop relationships with carriers. This is an area where I find brokers very short-sighted. They focus exclusively on what's the cheapest rate that I can get for this load today. They're not focused on the long term. So when you take this approach, it's much more of a long-term sustainability approach. That's why I said the secret to success long-term is digging your well before you're thirsty. So carriers, obviously you need to focus on developing strong relationships with carriers. If you are pulling every one of the carriers that you're using to cover your loads off of a load board every day over an extended period of time, that is a recipe for disaster. You have to find carriers, identify carriers that are running those lanes, and then develop relationships with them. So that's another, and these are long-term relationships that will far surpass and trump, any individual load or truck that's available in any given market. Okay, so we talked about developing relationships with shippers, the importance. We talked about the importance of developing relationships with carriers. What about your employees? Developing relationships with your employees. I see the same issue with entrepreneurs. They treat people like they're a commodity, and they're not, right? People are what drive our business. Without people, the business will fail. Technology is great. Systems are great, but it's like a hammer, right? A hammer is only as good as the hand that wields it, right? And so ultimately, those relationships that you develop with your employees is critically important, because if you have turnover, too much turnover, right, it's going to cause a huge disruption in your business. Now, there are studies out that, turnover, particularly in your sales department, if you turn over a salesperson or you make a bad hire or you turn them over, it can cost you upwards of $100,000 in cost, real cost, hard and soft cost. So developing long-term relationships with your employees will pay a huge long-term dividend. Okay. You cannot treat them like a commodity, no different than a carrier, no different than a shipper, right? So we talked about shippers, we talked about carriers, we talked about employees. What about your vendors? What about developing relationships with vendors? What about digging your well before you're thirsty with vendors, whether that be a software provider, whether that be a lawyer, whether that be an accountant, whether that be your banker or someone that handles your finances? Having strong relationships with those people, those strategic partners, right, is critically important long term to the success of your business. Because in all four of those scenarios, right, in all four of those scenarios, it's too late to dig that well when you're already thirsty. When you want something or you need something, like a lot of people right now in business are clamoring to try to get new business, right? In the freight industry, you've got a lot of people that are trying to email and call their customers and their prospects to try to get loads, right? And the problem is that in a lot of those cases, it's too late. You needed to plant those seeds and develop those relationships months, if not years ago, in order to leverage those relationships now when you need them, right? So the entire concept, again, I'm not giving you anything highly tactical today. This is much more strategic. This is something that is, I'm not teaching you a sales script. I'm not teaching you an email script. I'm not teaching you a very tactical topic today. This is much more strategic. And this is something that I really have a hard time with entrepreneurs, because they're typically very short-sighted. And I understand cash flow is important, and you've got to pay your bills, and you've got to generate revenue for your business, and you've got to pay your carriers, and you got to pay your employees, and you got to pay your agents. I get it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't make money, but what I am saying is you have to take a higher level approach to developing the relationships with those four groups: shippers, carriers, employees, and then vendors, particularly strategic partners like finance, banking, lawyers, accountants, consultants, right? People that can help fold time, teach you and help enable you to generate additional revenue streams. So this whole concept of dig your well before you're thirsty is something that, there's that old adage, right? What's the best time to plant a tree? Well, the answer is 20 years ago. What's the second best time to plant a tree? Today, right? So if you haven't been doing this, you need to start. And if you find yourself being too transactional in your approach, then you need to adjust that approach, because it's very easy to see when it's all about you. But when you invest in a relationship long term, it becomes all about them. Right. And so, as a broker, I'm going to tell you that if you as a broker or an agent take this type of approach and you flip the script and you focus more on relationships than you do on transactions, you will immediately differentiate yourself from the competition. They will immediately see the difference between you and everybody else that's calling them or approaching them or begging them for freight. So again, this concept is one, it's a long-term strategy. This is something like, for example, let me give you an example. Having these types of strategic long-term relationships that you've built over time and you've developed it where you're focused on relationships can provide huge dividends. Let me give you an example. So I have business relationships with people that I've known for months or sometimes even years, that I could literally call them up in the middle. I've never done business. They were never a client, but we've developed a relationship in business. Maybe they're not partners of mine, but maybe they're colleagues or people that I've worked with or I've helped, right? In one way or another. I could call them up in the middle of the night and say, I need you to wire $20,000 to me tomorrow morning, no questions asked, and the money would be there. Now, why is that? Why can I do that? I can do that because I've developed a relationship with those people over time where I've developed that level of trust and they know the value of the relationship with me, where I can call in that favor in the event that I need it. Now, most people can't do that. And the reason why most people can't do that is because they're very transactional. It has nothing to do with who they hang out with. And it has nothing to do whether it's $200 or $20,000. What it has to do with is if you broke down on the highway in the middle of the night, who could you call to jump in their car, drive 50 miles, and come get you? If you don't have a list of people that would be willing to wake up at 3:00 in the morning and come drive 50 miles, wake up, put their clothes on, jump in their car, and drive 50 miles to come get you and pick you up in the middle of the night and bring you home, that's a sign that you're not focused on relationships. And this goes beyond business. This is personal too, right? But we focus in on business today because for obvious reasons, because you guys are here to build a freight brokerage or a freight agency. But this concept of dig your well before you're thirsty goes way beyond just business, right? So, that's a little bit about what I wanted to share today. I want you to think about business long-term. I want you to think about business with a focus and an emphasis on relationships over transactions, okay? Because a strong relationship will always trump a transactional approach, right?